Welcome to the In Process podcast, hosted by Matt Thomas. I'm sitting here with Michael Mejia. Michael?
My name is Michael Mejia. Thanks, Matt, for having me on. I'm a novelist, author of two novels, Tokyo and Forgetfulness, both published by Fiction Collective 2. And I'm also a professor at the University of Utah, teaching in the PhD in creative writing program.
Today, Michael is going to be reading his short story, Coyote Takes Us Home, from the collection My Mother, She Killed Me, My Father, He Ate Me.
Coyote Takes Us Home. The twins, stowed beneath the spare tire, tell us a story about a small, square jardín in deep Jalisco, with neatly trimmed laurel trees and a cast-iron bandstand where Porfirio Diaz once stood and scratched his balls, where Pancho Villa farted, where Lázaro Cárdenas spat, where Vicente Fox picked his teeth. This was the exact spot where Subcomandante Marcos, Tia Chila's big bald black chihuahua, peed and peed and peed, and then mounted little diaperless Natividad. People came running. Nobody had seen a hybrid baby since before the war, since Juan el Oso, whose mother was taken to Acapulco by a circus bear from León. The twins were waiting on the curb, they say, watching the procession of the bloody martyr, when Coyote finally came out of the cantina. The silver scorpion on his belt buckle clacked its claws and made 7 blind sisters dance. "Will you take us?" the twins asked. Coyote sniffed the air and measured the moon between thumb and forefinger. It was more than half full, and the twins had had a strange delivery. But Coyote wasn't concerned. He led them across the bridge and down through the park to the dry creek bed where we were all asleep in the Nova among the stained herons, busted appliances, tires, maricons, and used condoms. A woman was weeping on the television. "Move over, little ones," Coyote whispered. "Make room, pariquitos." A few leaves fall for no reason in this story, and even now we hear the band playing, just as the twins say it is. The trumpets and clarinets spiraling like crazy rockets, exploding into pink sparks above the crowd. This all happened at a time of balloons and marionettes, they say. Is that the engine or the tuba? The transmission or the snare drum? Dust and stones become asphalt, a desert appears at blue sunrise, some rocks, a red flowering nopal, a thin horse, a goat. It's fine, we say. That sounds like a beginning. We can believe in that. Esta era, and we're gone. In the morning, we see some kids throwing rocks at a woman's head by the side of the road. They ride off on their bikes when we pull over. I met a man at a disco, the head tells us. The head of this woman tells us this man was a rich mestizo son, and how she danced a polka with him and lost one of her shabby little huaraches. How he tracked her down and mashed her toes into a plastic slipper he found somewhere and declared he'd marry her. How he shot twins up inside her that night, and how, when they were born, her stepsister sold them to some blue-eyed gringos from New Haven. The husband took his revenge by burying her up to her neck. "Those bitches are drinking champagne up in Polanco now, but they'll be back for me," she says. "They'll be back, my little ones, my little white children." One of those rocks must have knocked something loose. We throw a few more while Coyote trots up the road to hike his leg on a spot where a woman buried the devil caught in a bottle. "Mis gringuitas," the head cries. "Bring money." Pow! We hear our parents are dragging long sacks through fields of broadleaf bitter greens that we don't recognize. They are working in an orchard of small gnarled trees where children are cultivated with the help of bees. Our parents pluck them heavy from the branches, pinch them off their slender green stems, and redeem bushels for those kids for chits that mean food and cable television. The tractors start up and carry them to Chicago. Our parents work in a factory assembling little pink babies covered in feathers. They're waiting for us, our parents, stone-faced. They're laying out our shorts and our T-shirts on a firm bunk bed, our parents, our work clothes. Coyote says they found some devils in Arizona, in the desert, mingled in with the bloated corpses of those mojados from Guatemala and Nicaragua and Mexico. They were looking for work, too. It's not so easy for them either these days, you know. Coyote says those boys, Corin Coran, Terin Taran, Oyin Oyan, Pedin Pedan, Comin Coman, they got themselves locked inside a grain car in Matamoros. Then they sat trapped in a rail yard in Iowa for 4 months. When they were found, there wasn't much left. It's like Coyote is trying to trap us with his stories. It's like listening to him read the dictionary. You can't trust just nobody, he says. We hate the frown of his jade driving mask, the deep stare of its shell eyes. If you look too long, you feel heavy. You feel old. So we let him talk, but we don't listen, and we definitely don't keep still. We watch his words tumble out the open windows, turn to vultures on the road picking over something small carcass. What did you say, Coyote, we ask? What was that? What? Until he gets pissed off and stomps harder on the gas, making the Nova buck and fishtail. Anyway, he has hair in his ears. The boy in the headrest has a sister carved from coral, and the iron girl beneath the back seat was a present to an old man from 3 blonde sissies, lottery winners from Juarez. Coyote told us to wait in the Nova, but we were hungry. Through the window of her house, we could see the witch of Guamuchil, her tits pounding together like 2 wet cheeses, Coyote's teeth clamped to the loose flesh of her withers, his pink, skinny prick pumping in and out of her hairy rump. Once we threw some water on 2 dogs fucking. The girl from Tizapan killed a family pig by shoving a lit candle in its ass. As we crossed the highway, Pilar, Carlos, and Miguel were turned to paper by the touch of a southbound RV. They blew into the Sierra Madres. Adios, muchachitos. We were in a graveyard, watching our step. When the dead speak, it's like walking through a spider's web. Who's there? They kept asking, but we couldn't remember our names. There was a lot of dog shit around. Don't marry a woman who can't keep a secret, one of them said. Don't keep idle sticks in the house, said another. Don't shelter orphan children, called out a third. We wrote it all down with a stick and some sand, like nothing we'd need on the other side. We found the elotero sitting under a tree, eating the last of his ears of corn, but we're hungry, we said. Don't whine, he said, and threatened us with an umbrella. Everybody got 1 kernel, except Julio, who got none. That's when we noticed that the elotero was a corpse. Someone stabbed me, he sounded apologetic. No, I didn't, a voice objected. He had a kind face, the elotero, and he led us over a hill to a pile of old silver coins topped by a turd. A sad-looking devil was sitting on a stone trying to straighten 3 hairs. Diablito, is that yours? We asked, pointing to the turd or the silver, depending on how you looked at it. He gave us 3 guesses. Coyote craps at the Pemex, and we find an empty peanut shell and the body of a princess beside a dry riverbed. Embedded in the soil are immense architectural forms carved with images of jaguars and frogs, lizards and fire. There are rotted clubs and sharp stones like little warriors. There are feathered masts with thick lips and empty eyes watching the sun, and there are images of fanged creatures that we don't know, that we don't want to know. The scene reminds us of the RV we saw outside of Tecuala, turned over in a ditch and on fire, all those bloody chichimecs dancing around it, and the debris trail of DVDs and underwear and swimsuits stretching like a ragged quetzal plume for half a mile up the road. I'm frightened, Coyote, we say. He flicks us with his tail. The dead princess is like paper. She is curling at the edges and brown. Someone has drawn pictures all over her, like a map, like a journey home. We cannot read them. Help me, Coyote, we say, pointing, but he leads us back to the Nova and doesn't say a word for 1 hour. Still, we are not certain where or when this idea of our parents originated. People you have never seen waiting to feed and clothe you? The perro taught us what was edible, the gato how to hunt small things, the ardilla to conserve, the vaca to digest, the burro to take blows. We learned to construct our shelters from the arañas, and the mono taught us to stay light, just out of reach. The tecolote taught us to stay alert all night long. But then one day, we woke up all wet thinking of San Diego, Tucson, Denver, Chicago, San Antonio, Atlanta. We woke up waiting on Coyote without knowing we were waiting, watching for the dust of his Nova that would be coming down the dirt track from the Quota. We felt a little sick, a burning in our stomach. Our sinuses, too, our eyes were itchy. The man we called Tio gave us a black pill, but it didn't help. You'll be gone soon, he said. We had never seen him smile like that. And then the animals wouldn't speak to us anymore. They looked away. They stood dumb in filthy boots and their unpainted wooden masks. They sulked at the edge of the field of stones. They turned the corner when we waved. We cursed their sorry asses. We finally found them at the edge of town, by the dry wall, sitting together in a closed circle, drinking tequila and telling dirty jokes. In the mercado, their pale organs had been washed and laid out on a table. Later, touching the little white feet of the plaster virgin, we had a vision of the small wet opening between her legs. There was blood and hair and something else, a kind of worm. Who was going to tell us? The phone rang, and the woman we called Tia said, "Es tu mamá." Es tu America. A green bird circles the speeding Nova 3 times, screeching warnings about our stepsisters. There's poison in the pipián. There's arsenic in the tamales. There's mercury in the crab soup. There's DDT in the huitlacoche. Then it snatches Adelita out of the glove box for its trouble. At the edge of Hermosillo, everybody's looking for a ride north. Before the door of the cantina shuts, we peek in at a nude woman in the highest red heels holding a board painted with the number 8 above her head. 2 pretty, cumin-scented boys are standing around by the broken car wash with their shirts off, showing their thin, hairless chests to truck drivers who spit, pat their macho hair, tug their belts, pretend not to look. The boys' stiff penises are like industrial tools straining against their loose-fitting jeans. Their oiled coxcombs shine silver in the moonlight. "What is it, Coyote?" we ask. But he guides us away. Twins, like twin cities, sister cities. And when they turn, their identical tattoos read, "Queremos engañarte." What does it mean, we want to know. Back in the Nova, we are hot and uncomfortable, feeling just too big for our nests, our bodies like chopped pork sweating in the saucepan. We feel coated in a thick fluid. "Touch me," someone says, before Coyote guns the motor. Then we all shudder, and then we are asleep. The girl in the headlamp tastes roses, seeds in her mouth. She drools out a trail of hornless flowers and pearls that fly off into the desert. She is incomprehensible and stupid, and will marry well to a bastard. That's what Coyote says. "Shut up," shouts her stepsister in the other headlamp, black snakes slipping soundlessly from the lips of her syllables, encircling her snugly, sucking and shucking. We stop for the night at an abandoned hacienda. The engine of the Nova ticking and talking in the dark. Thorny vines reach over the walls, pick the shadow's pocket. The blue agaves are suffering. The avocado tree wants a word with her brother in the carburetor. "I gave my fruits to la madre, la morenita," she says. "What else could I do?" We can't sleep in the haunted dormitory. "Stay out of the cellar," Coyote says, but then he's snoring, so what else? We find a goat in a closet with the centuries-old reposados. A devil on a 3-legged stool insists that the goat's a princess, his ransom, his goddaughter, his bride-to-be. "Precioso," the devil says, showing his little gold teeth and their ivory fillings. In the ballroom, scarred films flicker on the wall, plum-suited charros singing there from horseback to the grazing herds and a hunchback burning the corpses of emaciated campesinos. The projectionist curled over his womanly machine sings along as he fondles its knobs. In matters of love, one never gets what one wants. Out on the patio, beside a shattered staircase, a blackbird lies pierced by long shards of the broken glass. One wing's almost off, and his breast is sheared open. The delicate bones, the Pedro Infante face, the fluttering little heart. This is the film version of our parents' romance. His amante has a madwoman's hair, dirty little virgin feet. The lap of her nightgown holds a heart-shaped bloodstain. Her 3 stepsisters hang by their necks from the porch beams. One redhead, one blonde, and one brunette. So peaceful, like beloved sleepers. Now we can forgive them. "I heard them whispering," our mother says, grabbing a pigeon and cutting its throat, draining the blood into a little clay pitcher. There are hundreds more gathering to gossip, perching on the hanging girls, in the trees, on the roof, waddling and pecking around the dry fountain. The empty halls echo with their coos and scratching nails. The sound effect is amplified to emphasize her dementia. "It's the only cure for this curse," she says, cutting open another bird, spattering the fractured tiles with black constellations. "Pure cinema." What they said, yes, that's what they said. Our mother looks at us, no fool after all. She is an international star. "The only way you can ever be born," she says, as the camera slowly zooms in. She looks away, a defiant tear in her eye. We are in love. "Mama," we sing, "your cantarito is only 1/4 full, so we'll join in your slaughter just until we get bored." But we work fast, maybe carelessly. Is it our fault some of the slower kids get in the way? We wander into the kitchen where beans are bubbling on the stove, a steaming pozole on the moon making fresh tortillas. It has a big ass and smells like canela. "Ay, niños," it sighs, wiping its hands on its apron. "You're so late. You need to eat. But where is Yolanda? Where is Areli? What's happened to Pancho and Enrique?" The truth is not pretty. We are so hungry, but then the sun bursts in wearing stained underpants and throws a brick at us. A watermelon, a mango, a boot. We swear that was for nothing. Ask the blackbird in the avocado tree, the mad amante hanging herself from the Milky Way. That pack of dogs snuck up on us. They came up out of a culvert in the dark, quiet, and with no eyes in their heads to reflect the moonlight. Before we could roll up the windows, they'd carried off Cruz, Rosario, and Virgilio, torn open their bellies, and plucked out their eyes. Ojos, hijos, huesos, lobos, they bark. They come at us with bloody jaws and those stolen eyes resting like pearls on their tongues. How many of us have been blinded because of you, to prove that the order to kill you has been carried out? Mocosos. You live while we're left to be kicked and to struggle for scraps, run off and run over. How, how, how? Coyote has the Nova in gear now, and he's swerving through the grove trying to get us back to the road. They're snapping at the kids in the rear bumper, barking their names like some wild Chichimec gang. Broke Rib, Pinchback, Swellfoot, Drop Tooth. Little Coyote huddles himself around the radio, comforted by the sizzling static and the stone in his mouth shaped like a human heart. Oh, now it's rush hour, golden hour, and all the Cadillacs chauffeuring our mothers to the suburban Seven Cities Mall are backed up for a glittering mile, and we are here in the Nova making time with some fine-ass white boys and girls on the service road, passing more public storage units and strip malls, legal services and sandwich shops and blood testing agencies and nail salons like a never-ending, ever-repeating commercial for what we call El Norte. Ice cream, Coyote. Starbucks, party rentals, Outback, 2-for-1 tattoos and piercings. He must not hear us. You don't believe us? Okay, so suppose it's just more underdeveloped Sonora sand and cactus out there, squalid shelters rigged out of cinder blocks, sticks, and plastic, and we're tired of playing I Spy and license plate Loteria. And the sun hurts our eyes because we lost our hats, and Coyote says there's no extra money to buy us any. So there's a young man on horseback, a Tejano prince, in a tall white hat, Coyote. And he doesn't squint, Coyote. So he's handsome. He's got 1 million MySpace friends, mostly gay men and 12-year-old girls, and a great big contract with Televisa. He will be our president, si se puede. And there's a woman in a maid's uniform who loves him and who doesn't know yet that she's pregnant, and she's crossing the highway to dust the furniture and vacuum the floors and wash the sheets and towels and sex toys at the Yankee-owned timeshares overlooking El Mar Vermijo. Each air-conditioned unit has tinted windows, according to the brochure, so you have no idea what those sunburned gringos are up to, do you? And the maid lady, Coyote, she's wearing cheap sunglasses and a thong that she borrowed from her nasty prima, who's home doing her nails and getting fucked like a goat by the maid lady's infected boyfriend, who's trying to watch the Toluca match and keeps asking, "Are we there yet? Are we there yet? Are we there yet?" So hey, Coyote, we're getting a little cranky. Are we there yet? Goal, 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 goal! Francisco, the goat boy of Ameca, rides round and round in our hubcap, stroking the bloody left ear he sliced off Bofo's bald head, a trophy of that championship season in Guadalajara. Cisco's parents cleaned the lab where he'll be studied in Portland. That's what Coyote says. Chivas! Cisco shouts every time we hit a hole. Chivas, campeón! And the girl we call La Serena. She won't say where she's from. She swims so many laps around the radiator, she grows flippers and a tail. She's going to boil and turn red. When the cap blows, she'll be riding those flaming plumes of gas, oil, brake fluid, and transmission fluid right into downtown Nogales. La Princesa, La Reina, La Gloria. Wouldn't you like to see? She will have her own apocalyptic cult, Nuestra Señora de la Nova. She is carrying the furious daughter of God. Coyote's friend, Conejo, is waiting outside the bus station. All las flechas amarillas cocked and aimed south at Celaya, Palenque, Pachuco, Querétaro, Mérida, Pátzcuaro, Potosí, Toyán, Veracruz, Aztlán. We're going to Gringolandia. Adios, adios, pendejos. Adios, vaya bien. Coyote whistles and Conejo gets in, his jeans and work boots crusted with plaster from building walls on the heights for Los Ricos. God damn, it's hot. Conejo strums his guitar. Conejo says, "Let's get the kids some ice cream." Coyote drives the car. "Let's get the kids some ice cream," Conejo says, and Coyote says, "Okay." Ay, que rica. Sometimes Conejo will lose his head. They have 1,000 flavors. Las viejitas hand out cups of elote, aguacate, mango, mole, cerveza, sensemilla, cacahuate, nopal, chicharrón, chorizo, lengua, frijol, and there's tents all around selling sopes and tacos. Al pastor, bistec, flor de calabaza, gusano, hormiga, chapulín, cantinflas masks, huaraches, gallaberas, Chiapas amber, Chivas wallets, bikinis, Zapata marionettes, pop guns, tops, jaguaras keychains, Piggy banks, balloons, Oaxacan silver, chickens, roosters, goats. We don't keep our hands to ourselves until they get chopped off and tossed in the cazuela. Borrachos. A procession of staggering yaquis circles the square with a pig wearing a crown of cactus thorns and a Patriots undefeated t-shirt. Father Pelotas, waving a feather and a valve from the uncorrupted heart of San Caloca, conjures a bloody little Jesus to scourge them. Infieles, Jesus shouts. Nihilistas. Apostatas. He snaps his whip against those bent Indian backs. He hopped out of a perfect little cloud. Every good dog barks fanatically. And then one thing leads to another. The 13th apostle slips out of a mural and sneaks off to a motel with Concepcion. Osvaldo and Elvira get sucked into an infernal sphincter. Jaime is forced to enlist with the garrison. The concheros rattling chalchihuites start the ritual lucha between La Morenita and La Malinche. Our Lady clobbers the other with a chair. She's bloody, she breaks a nail, she cracks a rib, she gets her ass beat with a cornstalk. That one's got some cojones. Juan Diego and Cortez tag in, slapping, pulling hair, gouging eyes. The loser will be shaved. Later, we're cruising the heights with Morenita cuddling her bloody little Jesus in the Nova's back seat, tickling his beard, teasing him with his whip, the tip of it just beyond his delicate grasping fingers with their trimmed nails. He squeals and she nurses him, nurses us all with her Extremaduran rompope until we're laid out. All except Coyote, whose shell eyes are glowing at us in the rearview mirror, drunk and happy on her magnificent jiggling lap, the map light of her countenance, guiding our dreams toward board games and bunk beds. Let there be bicycles, golden, slick banana seats and temperate green summer. You won't come to my house? Morenita asks. Her breath stinks. We see one black curling hair on her chin. These bright, vacant streets, lamplit and sober, Conejo sings a narco corrido and gives everyone the creeps. A private security guard in a bulletproof vest raises his atlatl. He says, "Get the fuck out." "No tocar," Conejo sings. "No tocar, no tocar, no tocar. Ay, que barro." Something smells like fabuloso, walls of bougainvillea that protect the beautiful sleeping families. Conejo says, "There was this kid who loved the Dodgers, see? Chavez Ravine, Fernando Mania, all that shit. He had this friend who worked in them new fortress condos in Tijuana, you know? High rise. And they snuck past security and got up on the roof and ran him up the flagpole, and he was up there, way up above the clouds, just so he could see all the way to Los Angeles. Jose, they started calling at him. Jose, Jose, Jose. They got so worried someone's going to kill them. Si, le oigo, Jose calls down, like a little angel. Eh, kids? Fucking Angel Jose, eh? And you know, those kids call back, Jose, 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 can you see? A la luz, la aurora, Jose is singing. Lo que tanto aclamamos la noche a querer. Ay, ha, ha, ha. And Coyote punches Conejo right in the mouth. That broke his last good tooth. Conejo sucks a lime. She's emerging through the static, big-titted fronterista in chaps and mirrored sunglasses. You've got mother's milk on your breath, chica. You've got a juicy pera, death's head thighs, semi-automatic eyes. You're a shock to our guts, our inflamed rectum. We do a Mixtec boogaloo, an otomi polka, a Yankee tango. Now we're setting the Nova bouncing like a motherfucking lowrider. At our last stop to pee before the border, we find an empty peanut shell and a naked girl in a maguey plant. A shotgun shell and a naked girl. Seashells. Some spent shells. Coyote has to hold Conejo back, bind his filthy mouth shut with his belt. She looks crazy as a huichol, the moon in her eye, the sun in her head. We shudder in the heat. She says gemelos and nods, as if it has never been said before. As if she is naming us. There is a busted-up Nawa keyboard in the dust, a blown-out VGA monitor, a snake or two. We walk around the saguaros, listening to the snap of Walmart bags like little flags flying from the fingertips of the choyas. There is a bullet-riddled phone book, an empty zapato. There is the tall fence and the Franciscan shelter where they hold the kids who don't make it over. They reach out through the barred oval windows grasping for birds and bugs, and the hooded monks pluck them out with giant tongs. Then they send them back around again to the rear, limping, misshapen forms. Where are the others, we ask. Coyote touches our ears. What others, periquitos? There's always only been you. You two, the two of you. He looks around, he smiles. They paid for two. We suckle the girl's dark, fat nipples, her milk picante, ashy, thick as the sludge of Tia's latrine. We bite, We tug, we tear, we have to try so hard, the girl's coaxing fingers in our hair, she digs in her nails until our scalps bleed. Coyote gets it all on video. He sighs as we sniff her almeja. We crawl up into the uterus and have never slept so well. We sprout feathers and short hair. There is something else curled up in one corner. The stars are out when we return covered in blood. We have the taste of flesh in our mouths. We just want to dance beside the flaming mage, let our arms and legs rotate free like the severed spouting limbs of holy martyrs. We stomp the earth, one bare foot touches a rock. All our blood and sugar runs from our ears, mouths, eyes, assholes, the shit, chocolate, tears, and salt. Watch your fingers, we bite. It's been a long day. Pretty soon, we're over it. It passes. It's dark. Coyote licks us clean and puts us to bed while Conejo and a devil play cards for all the diablitos in hell. As he wins, Conejo eats the diablitos, crushes their strong little bones between his rotten molars, throws the shells on the ground. But the devil keeps gambling. He plays 2 deer, a frog, and death. Conejo plays a rooster. Coyote packs beeswax in our ears and covers our aching eyes with dried pasillas. It works, we hear the devil say. I've tried it. My wife, too. We've been in line for hours and hours, the Nova crawling through the last chance tianguis. Conejo is buying gifts in American dollars, blankets and T-shirts, stinking herbal remedies, shot glasses, ashtrays, and Aztec sunstones carved from Tehuacan coprolites. We huddle, maize seeds in a matchbox. We pray they don't search us or ask for if Coyote's our daddy or what school we go to. We are suffocating and sick, double-wrapped in plastic bubble wrap. Coyote is practicing calm responses, but that chingada Conejo cannot stop giggling. We were visiting, Coyote will say. Our tiny little mothers, Conejo will say. Pobrecitas. Please step out of the car, the armed agent will say. It's the Padres ahead 1-0 in the bottom of the 5th. We take a chance for a glance. Through the line of cars we can see to the other side. We see the yellow welcome sign beside America's freeway. Our papa stumbling drunk on his way home. Our mama running from La Migra, dragging our American-born sister Conejita behind by one hand, her feet just leaving the ground. It's all true, querida, all true. She is flying. They can fly. Niños fly in Gringolandia. And now we are two, out of the Nova over Coyote and Conejo, spread-eagled on the hot concrete. We are flying as if through a windshield, through glass, through steel, through the smoke and haze, the choke and maze, the toke and craze, the coke and phrase book. We're flying. It's the way the chicken flies to the pot. Which came first, the fire or the flame? We are flying, feathered and boned to you, querida mama, naked and new, papa, sin entrails y contrails, la raza limpia, raza pirata, oscuro, how do you say? Deportization? No, it's the way ESPN flies to Fox. Satellite eyes, you're beautiful. Something small on a wind crossing over. But before we forget, adipose, Oceos, Adidas, a radio. Game over.
The thing that I always wonder when I'm reading something like this is, where did it come from? When did the idea first start, and what was the genesis of it, really?
I have sort of multiple answers for it. I mean, the story itself was sort of commissioned by my friend Kate Bernheimer, who's the editor of the collection My Mother, She Killed Me, My Father, He Ate Me, which is, the project was to produce contemporary fairy tales, an anthology of contemporary fairy tales. So Kate reached out to a number of writers and asked them, basically gave them the assignment to sort of like choose a fairy tale that was important to them and to sort of produce a contemporary version of it. And, I had done a little project sort of similarly for her earlier for an anthology called Brothers and Beasts. It was, writers writing short essays on fairy tales that were important to them, and I had chosen Bluebeard at that time, and that was a fun assignment. And so thinking about this one, I didn't want to do Bluebeard again, and I had also been thinking about a new project that I'm kind of still working on at this point about my family's relationship, my father's family's relationship to Mexico. And I had actually just come back from doing some research in Mexico when I heard from Kate. And so I thought, okay, I want to do a Mexican fairy tale, and I didn't really know any, to be honest. That just wasn't a tradition that I grew up with. So I just went looking, and interestingly, I found in the library an edition of folk tales from Jalisco State that had been printed in the mid 1940s, I think 1946, and it was part of the Folklore Society of America. It was like their professional journal, and so the editor of that particular issue had gone to Jalisco, walked around, just sort of like encountering, people on the road in small towns, et cetera, and was just soliciting, folk tales from them. And they were all recorded in Spanish, written down in Spanish, but there was a little English language précis for each one. It's a thick book. I mean, it's probably 400 pages of this. And so I thought, surely I'll find something in here. So I started, going through the whole book, basically just reading all the précis. And it was super interesting. Like there were, versions of what seemed to be familiar fairy tales like Cinderella that had been, rendered in Spanish. There were a lot of animal tales that seemed to have come from indigenous traditions. There were a lot of sort of like comic tales about, priests dealing with campesinos and stuff like that. And so what I ended up doing with this project was like I couldn't choose one, and I thought, what I'm really interested in was, this sort of process of immigration and sort of how culture sort of changes, gets lost in that process of translation, in a sense. And so that's kind of what I did. Was I was interested in sort of packing as many of these fairy tales into, or these folk tales into, my story about kids crossing the border, as a way of sort of suggesting like the baggage, or sort of like all the culture that sort of had that they had grown up in being left behind in some way. And so they're part of that folktale culture, in the sense that like the folktale culture is sort of clinging to them, sort of trying to hold on to them in a sense, doesn't want to let them go as they cross the border.
That's great. That leads into really one of the biggest questions I had, which was about the animal imagery. I saw on the front page that it was from a collection of modern folk tales, and I thought it was really interesting because it seems like such a harsh contrast between the really mature stuff, stuff that I guess maybe in the 1800s would be in a folktale, but it isn't really what we consider a folktale today. So that really mature content through the eyes of a child, these child protagonists, this we, which puts everything into the context of animals. Like there's Coyote, who calls them paraquitos, which I found out while reading this means bird, and there's Conejo, which is rabbit, and then they play against roosters while gambling at one point. And so I wanted to ask about that in conjunction as well with this recurring figure of the devil. What was the intent there?
So, I mean, Coyote was probably the most obvious choice that I made, right? I mean, it's an immigration story, and it comes from the tale that I saw in the news, and I think I saw it in the news. I never was able, when I tried to find it again, I couldn't find it, but I had read a story about a car that had been searched at the border, and that people had been stowed away in various parts of the car, and I was fascinated by that, and also just the phenomenon of unaccompanied children coming across the border. And this, I wrote this story actually around 2010, so it was really before the period that unaccompanied minors at the border became such a huge story in the news. But I had this idea. I wanted to sort of think about this car loaded with people, and people sort of stuffed into every crevice of it, and sort of think about like what could come of that. So as an immigration story, of course, the Coyote is a nickname for the human trafficker, and so that character had to be there, the driver of the car bringing these kids over, and it was very easy then to sort of imagine this character both like as a human but also as an animal. And as I mentioned, like the animal stories in that book of folk tales also encouraged other kinds of animals to come in. And I mean, I just love the word conejo. Rabbit, seemed like a good, almost like a little trickster or sort of like sidekick character for Coyote. So that was kind of the thing. And also, again, I mean, just as a as a folktale, like the ambiguity between human and animal characters, animals with human characteristics and such, that's what I was really playing with. Oh, you asked me about the devil too, yeah. And, obviously like huge Catholic tradition in Mexico. And, sort of play with that a little bit with the bloody Jesus, right? These sort of like really graphic imagery that that you'll see there, as opposed to some more reserved images that you might see here in the U.S. or in Europe or whatever. But I'm also like, there's just this, like these folk images of the devil, of devils, and they're often like, they're not sort of embodying evil in a sense. They're often just like little gremlins kind of dancing around with, big smiles on their faces and stuff. And again, like a little bit of a trickster character. So that was what I was thinking about with the various devils and diablitos that are sort of populating this piece. That, sort of like sad sort of loser character that that can never quite get over on people.
I love it. Let's talk a little more about your characters, because one thing that I found really interesting is that you don't introduce them in a typical fashion. They seem to float in and out of the story. There's the two twins with their stiff penises against their loose-fitting jeans, who are like a fascinating image. And then you'll mention a white girl in the back of the truck, or these fine white boys, or a sister carved out of coral, and Conejo just appears suddenly. I want to know about how you develop those characters and when you choose to introduce them.
I think, as you can see, like the story is really, there's a dominant narrative arc of the journey from somewhere in Mexico, rural Mexico, to the border. And within that, I gave myself a lot of freedom in terms of the structure of the piece, so it's very episodic. And in ways I was just kind of like, I was just sort of imagining sites where I wanted to sort of like develop a little narrative, like, when they stop at the abandoned hacienda or the gas station where those twins appear. So pretty much anything could happen there, right? It's sort of like they're running across people who are also traveling, north, or Anglo people traveling south, right? They run across this RV that's on its way, that's coming from the U.S. In the case of the twins, like that is a folktale that I came across in the book that I mentioned. And the tattoo on the back of one of them is a punishment that is imposed on someone in that tale, right? Sort of revealing their guilt over a crime. And so, again, like they don't have any particular symbolism in that particular scene other than this tale, the characters of that tale just kind of hanging around, living life. And the narrator of the collective narrator of the piece is observing these things, but not really understanding what it is that they're leaving behind. They're so young, like they don't even kind of realize, what it is that they're about to lose, in a sense. That's why people kind of come and go. It's just sort of like a little bit of a whim on my part to sort of say, all right, I want to talk about this tale now, or, this site or whatever.
I like what you said about it being episodic, because I can definitely see that. And the structure I thought was so interesting because obviously we're filtering it through the eyes of these children. And so that's where the myth making kind of came into it for me. The way a child will just tell you, oh yeah, I was walking through a graveyard and all the dead people started talking to me, or I saw these really weird looking twins that said, "We will deceive you" on their back, which is, I had to look it up, but that's what the tattoo meant for our English speaking audience. And so one thing that occurred to me, it might just be because I read a lot of screenplays, but you use "we" in introducing all of these scenes and describing what the audience sees. And so for a while I thought you were addressing the audience entirely as we, everybody reading it in a sort of collaborative myth-making, myth-building type of situation. But then you really surprised me. There's two instances where you suddenly use "you," and one of them is the second to last paragraph where you say, "You're beautiful." And it really surprised me just because it came out of nowhere that you were separating one narrator and the reader. Could you tell me a little bit about that decision?
The second person is, it's a challenging point of view to choose, and a lot of people avoid it because of, sort of like hard to figure out how to use it sort of convincingly in a way. And yeah, you kind of get a couple of different perspectives on it. Like on the one hand, there is this sense that you're talking to the reader, you're directing the reader of the thing. You know, you enter a room, you make yourself a cup of coffee, etc. And sometimes you'll encounter readers who are sort of like, I don't know, I don't like the second person because, you know, I don't want somebody to tell me what to do or what I'm doing. I'm not doing that, whatever. And it's like, okay, well, there's that. But then often I think, you know, successful uses of second person are really a kind of version of first person where the narrator of the piece is talking about a you, but it becomes clear as the story goes on, like they're actually talking about themselves, right? And it's a way of sort of creating this separation to sort of tell some truth about yourself. In order to get there, you have to create this other version of yourself that you can comment on, right? So in this case, the we narrator is suggesting not just the kids in the car that turn out to be a pair of twins at the end, but this sort of broad, you know, generation of unaccompanied minors. And so in that case that you mentioned where the narrator says, "You're beautiful," they're speaking to another individual, not necessarily somebody that appears in the story, but a figure that they see on the side of the road, an imagined parent, etc.
Jumping off the parents, tell me a little bit about that, because I thought that was really interesting how obviously they had parents that they were going to, but they were still trying to imagine what they were actually like. What is the character's relationship with their parents?
I think what I was imagining there are children that are very young, like so young that they may never have really known their parents, right, or couldn't remember them because the parents had already immigrated. And I think we, in our current situation, I think we're much more aware of the risks that parents, children, whole families are taking in order to make this journey from very far away. Like this story originates in Mexico, but we see now like there are people coming from Central America, from South America, from Asia, from Africa, up through Central America to get here by the same route. So people are risking so much just to get here. At the time, though, I was sort of thinking through the risks of family, right? The risks that parents take to, come to the U.S., maybe they'll return home at some point, or the goal may be to sort of bring their children at some point later when they've earned the money to pay for the transport for the child. So somebody else, in this case, the aunt and uncle, are taking care of the children, until Coyote shows up. So in a sense, like the relationship between the children and the parents in the story is very weak in that, they haven't had those parents to care for them, to nurture them, to teach them, et cetera. They've been in the hands of this aunt and uncle. And I guess in a way, you sort of think about those stories that they imagine about the parents. We don't know that they're true, right? The parents work at a lab, they work in an orchard. Those are all possibilities, and in a sense, those are the tales of actual migrants, right, working in a variety of jobs. But in the context of the story, the relationship between the children and the parents is aspirational, right? That the parents sort of represent the possibility of a home, the possibility of a family life, a kind of normalcy, as we understand it on this side of the border, and that's what the children are trying to get to.
The one line that has really stuck with me is when the dead speak, it's like walking through cobwebs or spider webs, I think. Mm-hmm. In that entire scene of them walking through a graveyard, well, different ghosts speak to them. I want to know where that came from and what that means to you.
Again, like some of this stuff just comes direct from those folk tales, just trying to find a site, in this case, a graveyard, that would allow me to sort of like engage these references to these very varied folk tales. And so when the dead speak in that scene, the advice that they're calling out is usually like the morals of some of those folk tales. And so that's kind of where that's coming from. But, the image of death, the relationship to death in Mexico is well known as a culture unique from how we think of and relate to death and the dead here in the U.S. And so, I wanted it to be a live place. a place where the dead are actively interacting with the children that are walking through. But then, it was probably had in mind at the time Juan Rulfo's novel, Pedro Paramo, where the main character comes to Comala, this town where he's going to meet his father, or thinks he's going to meet his father, and it's a ghost town, right? And so he's sort of constantly, running across these people who know his father, and they seem real to him at first. They seem real to us as readers. And then, pretty quickly we start to understand, like, this is a strange place. Like, these people seem to they're here and then they're gone. And then they come back, like, as though they're coming through the walls. And what we find out eventually is that he ends up in a graveyard, surrounded by the dead of the town. And they're all sort of speaking back and forth. So there was definitely some Juan Rulfo going on there with that too.
Especially when they're talking about the film version of their parents' romance. Their mom is a star. She's an international movie star. And as they present the different possibilities of who their parents might be, you realize that they don't even really understand where they're going or why they're doing it. They just know they have to. And it's kind of heartbreaking. I want to ask about the last scene where Coyote and Conejo are spread eagle on the pavement. They've been caught, obviously, at the border, and then our protagonists are flying, which I connected to their nickname of Periquitos. Tell me about where that came from.
To go back to your comment about the children not really knowing where they're going, I mean, I was very determined. I wanted to write this story about the journey, about the process of coming across. That was not just a physical journey, but a process of transition, translation, and ultimately of loss, right? A sort of loss of culture. And so I was very determined that the U.S. as an entity, as a goal, right, would never be fully realized, would never be the sort of like land of golden opportunity as it's often imagined by us and in some ways by migrants themselves, right? I mean, it's interesting if you look at the variety of stories, news stories covering migrant journeys, often their quotes involve very similar wording about, I just want an opportunity, I want a better life, I want a better life for my children, etc. So there is this sort of like concept of the U.S. as this land of opportunity. And I wanted to sort of resist that myth and just sort of think about, like, what was it going to be like once the kids actually got there? What were they going to see? Well, what they see is the very famous yellow sign that you see down close to the border in California, for example, and it's got a migrant family that seems to be running across the road. So it's like basically like just as you might see in Montana or Colorado, sort of like deer crossing, right? Here's like migrant crossing. So I was looking at that sign, trying to think about, like, how do I describe that without just saying there's a sign of migrant crossing? And so that's how I got the father is sort of falling down. The mother has a little girl in her hand, and the girl's feet have come off the ground. Her hair is sort of flying. So that's where that idea of flying came from, right? Sort of like describing that sign and sort of seeing this girl that seems to be flying, although it's really like her mother yanking her along. I wanted that sort of scene to be this kind of dissolution at the end of the day, right? As you mentioned, Coyote and Conejo end up caught by the border guards, but that doesn't stop the kids. Like, the kids sort of like take off in imagination, perhaps in reality, and sort of dispersing into language. It's sort of pure language there at the end, and sort of like these kind of versions of adios, sort of being transposed through different homonyms, basically.